You want me to hit it? Because we are live now.
Yeah.
Cool.
Welcome to the FasCat podcast. I'm your host, Frank Overton. Some call me the Big Cat, and I'm joined with Jackson Long here today.
Hello, everyone.
In the house.
Pleasure to be here. Happy Thursday. It's finally nice out.
Best day of the week.
I know.
Podcast Thursday. Today, we are doing a question and answer podcast as part of Good Periodization. Every 4 weeks, we do this Q&A. We've got some user athlete submitted questions that we're going to go over for you all. And if you're listening live and you want to submit your questions, go ahead and do so in the comments, and we'll get them into this podcast.
Sweet. We have a couple announcements before we start the questions and the answers.
So we have a new coaching subscription, and it is user inspired. For $39, you can subscribe to our coaching subscription, and with your training plan, you can have a coach, one of the FasCat coaches, sometimes me, revise your plan once a month and analyze your data once a month. And you're given access to the subscription-only members forum where you can ask your questions and get a higher level support from your plan. So if you're not ready to take the leap on coaching, this is kind of an evolution of the consultations. So we used to do the phone consultations, which we just don't do anymore. So check it out. It's on our website. And yeah, it's a really nice solution for the person that wants to FTFP, but just can't for whatever life reasons, and they want to know what to do instead. And then the other evolution of it is, for the past 2.5 years, I've been answering questions about training with power, and, first in our Facebook group and then in our forum. And a lot of times the answer is, I just really need to go in and see that data.
Yeah.
And to analyze it ourselves, use our expertise, and then give you an answer based on the data versus just trying to describe.
And so is that all built into the forum?
It is. Yeah. So once you buy the subscription, you're given access to the subscription area portion. You ask your question. You're going to connect your Training Peaks account to the FasCat account. So it's super easy and elegant. You just go through those steps, and then we'll go into your Training Peaks and actually move the workouts around and then analyze your data and then, give you an answer right there in the forum.
Sweet. That's cool.
Yeah. Check it out. What else do we have announcements-wise?
We're back from the oat route.
Yes.
Go check out the little recap video that I just made on the YouTubes.
Nice work.
It was actually pretty hard to film. I was like expecting to be just filming all the time, but I was cross-eyed for most of that, so it was hard to film. But I got some good footage.
Yeah.
Some cool GoPro shots of like the descent on the Blue Ridge, the gravel section.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And then Frank and I just kind of debrief, discuss, some of our favorite parts, and I kind of weave it in. So I think it turned out pretty well, I thought.
I noticed the early morning hotel segments didn't make the cut.
I know.
Yeah.
It just didn't really. It wasn't really that worth it, I thought. We were, not in our best shape.
It was a very good event. I'm looking forward to going back. But like Jackson noticed, you're busy holding on to the bars, rodding versus making content.
Especially that first day, it was pouring rain for most of it, so I was like not gonna pull out the camera too much.
419 TSS, that says it all for me.
Yeah, and then I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, it's summertime here in Boulder finally. Great riding. We are going to. Should we talk about our content calendar?
Yeah, we can talk about some stuff that's coming up in the pipeline.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about the origins of FTFP. We'll get into it a little bit here today. For those of you that are new to the podcast, that's follow the plan. Oftentimes, that is the answer to a lot of the questions. And I really think it goes back to the origins of developing good training habits. So we'll talk about that. Also, trust the process.
Yeah, and I think kind of like the 7 or so successful habits of, good cyclists, masters athletes, successful sportsmen and women, I think is kind of fits in with that. I think that's a good topic to talk about. So we have some ideas for how we'll put that together.
Absolutely. And then we're going to do one on a coach's buyer's guide. A lot of times I get asked the question, should I buy this? What do you think of that? What about this power meter? What should I do? I want to spend some money on my cycling as it relates to my performance. And so we're going to tell you, we'll break it down into $50, $100, $250, $500, and even go up to like $1,000 of what you can do to buy some watts.
Yeah, the best bang for your buck, the best use of your hard-earned cash.
Yeah. And in time trialing, they say you can buy speed, and it's true, with the disc wheel or the aero helmet. And you can also do that with like your coaching and your performance. So, but we have no affiliation with any of the vendors, but we have some good ideas for you.
And then I think we'll kind of, as it gets closer and closer, start going into the Steamboat Gravel.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Pre-race. It's coming up fast. And I think with DK, Dirty Cans are coming up this weekend. I think a lot of people are starting to get excited about these longer, gravel events, and Steamboat, I think, is going to be one of the more memorable races on the calendar this year. It's brand new, and we're really excited about it. So I think we're going to definitely do some sort of pre-race show, kind of breakdown, not similar like to what we did with the Crusher last year. Just discuss, some of the key, considerations and aspects for the course, the equipment, how to ride, how to train. And I think I think that'll be a pretty cool episode.
Yeah. We'll talk about also specific routes in Boulder, and then maybe other route considerations where you live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about gravel, good luck to all the DK racers out there.
Yeah. It's going to be crazy. It seems like it's going to be an epic week.
Epic week.
All these pro world tour pros going in to throw down. And I saw like a thing that they are not separating the field. It's just everyone's in there.
All for one.
It'll be fun.
Yeah. Mass start chaos.
I, for one, am glad I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Personally.
Not only is it 200 miles, but you got to race against Taylor Fay.
Yeah. I was just like, nah.
Yeah. It's going to be very fun for all of you. And you know what you should do after you do the DK, if anyone's listening? You should take a mid-season break.
Which
is our first Q&A question.
Great segue. I'm proud of you, Frank. That was amazing.
I thought of that all by myself.
Yeah, great. All right. So let's do it. Let's get into it. So from Chad, talking about mid-season breaks, how do you know when and if to take one, and what can you do in terms of training during this break, and then how to proceed after the break? So
the mid-season break emanates from roadies and mountain bikers, where traditionally you would start racing in March, for example, and then race almost every weekend until, let's say, September, like Labor Day. And the normal thinking was you divide your season up into two halves and take a break in the middle there, like 3 or 4 complete days off, maybe even a whole week of just kind of downtime. Nowadays, now that we're concentrating less on like a traditional road race program where you're maybe targeting like 2 or 3 events, it's a little bit different. However, so we alluded, the people that have been training a lot for the DK, not only are they going to be physically wrecked, mentally wrecked. It makes all the sense in the world to take a break after that. In fact, you may not want to take a break, but your body's going to be like, we have to take a break. So that would be your mid-season break there. If you're racing the road, when to take that mid-season break is, you don't want to do it too soon because your season's just getting started. You don't want to do it too late because then you got 4 weeks left in the season. So usually that time is, traditional March through Labor Day is sometime in June, right after Memorial Weekend. And the presumption is that you have trained hard for an A event. You've maybe done an overload. You've tapered down. You've tried to peak. And then maybe you kind of run out that form for a couple of weeks after that. And then you're far enough along into the season where mentally you may be getting a little bit crispy, slightly burnt out. Maybe you have like a summer vacation with your family. School's getting out. A lot of folks will, go on a summer family vacation, something like that. That's a great time to take a mid-season break. So think in terms of that. As far as the length goes, it can be anything from, 2 to 3 days to a whole week, kind of depends on your situation. The longer the break you take, the more time it's going to take to build back out. So don't take a break 2 weeks before your next A race. And then if you need to take a break, then maybe 2 weeks later, don't make that an A race. So you want to also space that break out further enough ahead of your next A event. And traditionally, the roadies would, try to peak for like a Gila or a Memorial Day race, take a break, build back up through the season for 5 to 6 weeks. That's where Sweet Spot got invented. And then you try to peak for a race, say, mid to late August, like something at the end of the season. Like here in Colorado, we have the Steamboat stage race.
Or Cascade.
Traditionally. If you live in New England, the Green Mountain stage race. That's at kind of the end of the season. But yeah, if your A race is like the Tour of America's Dairyland is coming up, 2-week crit series, you don't want to be taking a mid-season break right now. Now is like go time. And then after Dairyland, the week of July 4th, when you might do some holiday vacation, take a break then and then get back at it. And Chad asks, what do you do after the break? Well, Sweet Spot. Your CTL is going to have down. And the biggest thing to do is get back on your bike, ride consistently, bring your training load back up. And the best way to do that is with Sweet Spot training.
Cool. All right. Next question from Chris, asking about altitude training. Specifically, he asks train high, live low. And he has the ability to drive up to his local ski resort at 6,000 feet. And so he's just wondering, is there any benefit? Would there be much gain for doing this to go, drive up there to ride? I understand that the pros of doing this the opposite, but he's found very little information on train high, live low.
Yes, that's because it's not really a thing. The physiological benefit comes from train low, live high. That you stimulate red blood cell production, and then you go down low where you're able to train at a higher quality, make better power output, train hard, and then you go up to sleep, and that's the adaptation. So riding high, living low is the opposite, but there are some benefits. Temperature, when it gets really hot, it's really nice to go up to like the peak-to-peak highway, do some good training. And one thing that just occurred to me, what happens when you go up higher? You have less oxygen. You're unable to make as good a power output, and you're not able to kind of flog yourself as much. Your power outputs are lower, and so the training stress from that is lower. And I am recalling, how like the runners here in town go up onto Magnolia Road, and they run up there, and I think that's to minimize the stress of like if they were to do that down here, they're going to run a lot faster, and they're a lot more muscle damage. I don't know. I haven't talked to any running coaches, but Magnolia Road is a road up here in Boulder, and it's at about 8,000 to 9,000 feet. It's a very popular running segment for the 10Kers. They go up high to run, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the physiological stress is less.
It's pretty stressful to ride and train at altitude. But I think, it gets, maybe it would make sense maybe it does make sense if you don't want to do crazy high, heart rate or high like intensities, while still getting, some quality training. I think it makes more sense to do the sleep high, train low, because then you can get those benefits. But I don't know. I think it's, weren't you saying that there was a great podcast you listened to recently about this phenomena?
Yeah, on Flow Cycling Podcast, Dr. Robert Chapman was a guest. He is an altitude expert with USA Track and Field, and he was saying the question that this goes to Sebastian's question, which is coming up next, is the question that we always get is when you should go to altitude for competing at an altitude event. So like Masters Nationals this year is in Colorado Springs, and for the other, that's great for us here in Colorado. It really won't affect us too much. But for the athlete coming from Indiana or Mississippi or Louisiana, they live at sea level. It's like how is that going to affect them, and then what can they do to adapt to that? And it's a common ask for athletes. I mean, Masters Nationals was in Ogden a couple years ago. Mountain Bike Nationals this year is in Winter Park.
Yeah.
And that's even higher here than Boulder. I think that's like I'm gonna say 8,000 feet. That's like the base is like 7,500.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's a thing. And so in this podcast on Flow Cycling, Dr. Robert Chapman said they studied the effects of altitude on 3 different experimental groups. One was the group that came in 3 weeks or more sooner to adapt. One was the group that drove up over the course of 2 days. And then one was a group that came in as late as possible, like the evening before. And so his conclusion was it really didn't matter. They didn't find any significant difference. And so coming in the night before the race presents some logistical problems and preparation problems.
Yeah, even separate from the altitude.
Right. So it's a pro-con. It's like, hey, you may minimize the effects of altitude, but you haven't done number pickup. You haven't seen the course. It's slightly stressful. Probably won't get a good night's sleep. So to do all those things and then not really worry about the altitude, that it's a pro-con. And so I think to answer your question is just come in when it's going to work for you. And yeah, the altitude is going to affect you. The reduction in oxygen is it's about 1% per 1,000 feet of differential. That's an estimation. Yeah. Drink lots of water when you come up. We have less. You lose a lot of body water weight when you come up to altitude, and when you race, maybe not look at your power meter so much because it's going to be lower. Race by feel and heart rate.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of coming back to Chris's question about going up to the ski resort. I think I've also read, and maybe I'm completely wrong here, but I've also read that the altitude difference of like going up to altitude to train there's not a huge, and even sleeping, there's not a huge difference unless it's like above 8,000 feet, I think. Does that sound right? Like there's not a huge benefit to doing anything lower than that. And so again, it's like, well, logistically, what's it like for you to go up there? Like, is it going to take a lot more time out of your day, taking time away from recovery? I think you probably won't see a ton of benefit from like going up to 6,000 feet to train, on a regular basis. But I mean, I think it's worth self-experimenting on.
What you're talking about, you need a differential of about 5,000 feet.
Okay, that was it. That's
so
right.
To realize the physiological advantage of train low, live high.
Yeah.
And so if you live at 2,000 feet, you need to go up to like 7,000 feet or higher. And so like the Euro pros will go to Gran Canaria, and I think they do it in meters over there, but it's a difference of like, 4,800 feet. You can sleep up on the mountain and go all the way down, do the training low, and then go back up on the mountain. And it's a big enough altitude difference to actually stimulate physiological adaptations.
Cool. All right. So we kind of answered Sebastian's question. Moving on to Helen. She asks about recovering from a weekend or week of intense training or some sort of big event. And so she wanted to ask us about our experience after the oat route. So presumably you tapered for a week before and recovered for a week after. That can feel like a lot of rest. And so she's just wondering what we can do, or she can do, or you can do for kind of recovering after like a really intense event such as the DK or the oat route.
Yeah, or the Urut Asheville. And then, great question, Helen. I was decimated after Asheville. I don't travel as well and bounce back from it, as a master's athlete like I did when I was in my 30s or 20s, like walking through the airport and dragging your bike case to the airport, not getting, good sleep a couple nights. Like when we flew in, we got like 4 hours of sleep the night before, and that wrecked me. I was like, I was garbage the first day in terms of, training, and that affected me the whole weekend. But to answer your question about recovery afterwards, the biggest thing is time and patience. And I didn't ride, the Urut ended on Sunday. I didn't ride Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. A little bit, it was a function of the blizzard we had when we got back. But even if I had ridden on Wednesday, it would have been just a very short zone 1 active recovery spin. And then just because you take those 2 or 3 days doesn't mean you need to take the whole week, which I did. So you also, I did a very easy like endurance ride on Thursday. Friday was a recovery ride. I was listening to my body on Friday, and I thought I might be recovered, but I went out there on the bike and I was like, dang, I'm still tired. And, the Oat Route is such an event. You can feel it 2 days later, walking up the stairs, your body's all sore and stiff. You have this like deep down fatigue, and, don't plan on doing any hard training. When you recover appropriately, you actually will get faster because you got the training stimulus of the Oat Route, and then you recover. And then the physiological term is called super compensation. Your body builds back stronger than it was before. And last weekend, I had some pretty good rides because I had recovered. And I think that kind of sort of answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, same thing for me. I think also, like, Helen was also asking about nutrition. I think, you talked about like kind of the physical side. I mean, also just mentally, you have to, like, the travel, the logistics, it also is just mentally exhausting to be doing a big weekend stage race or a DK or something that, I mean, of course, the physical side is massive, but the mental side is something to consider too. So it's like, don't jump straight back into like the routine of, the stressful life. It's like kind of put the cycling to the back burner, and focus on like just kind of like, getting some. I mean, I think the Monday after Oat Route, I slept for like 12 hours. I think I went to bed at like 6 or 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Boulder time, because I was just like so wrecked mentally and physically. I was just like, I need to just check out. And that really helped me kind of revive after that. And then, in terms of nutrition, I think, you're on the road, maybe you're not eating the best because you're just kind of like eating whatever is around, and you're not in your normal like routine of winning in your kitchen, using your food and kind of like going to your normal grocery store. And so like, for me, one of my biggest things after traveling is like just coming back straight into, like my health nutrition food routine. So I just ate a ton of vegetables and fruit, just really high quality food in the tank, because your body is still recovering, multiple days after an event like this. And so it just needs that fuel and, and that kind of like those really rich antioxidant like foods, fruits and vegetables, to kind of help with that recovery process.
I found myself eating as much. Like my metabolism and hunger was like an overdrive. And I was eating, like even on Tuesday, I was eating as much as I was on like Saturday and Sunday of the Oat Route, like just ravenous. And, I think we were mentioning pre-podcast, they call that intuitive eating or whatever. It's like, just listen to your body and feed it. It's like, you just got through doing 4,000 kilojoule stages. So you just got to eat and get back at it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are like, they get really confused at like, a couple of days after a big stage race or something. They're like, why am I so hungry? Is there something wrong? And like, you just have to listen to that and just feed your body. I mean, because again, like, unless that's the very last event of your season, right, you have something else to come up. And the last thing you want to do is like undermine that recovery and have your body suffer as a result. And then it compromises your training, it compromises your sleep, it compromises your immune system. Don't want to go down that road.
Absolutely not. In terms of training, like for example, I've already told all my DK athletes, don't even look at Training Peaks next week.
Yeah.
That's mid-season break. And the last thing you need to do is worry about even an active recovery ride. I don't even put it on the calendar. And so for like me last week, I kept my training open-ended, listening to my body. Like I said, I didn't ride for the first 3 days. The last day was on account of a blizzard. And then Thursday, endurance ride. And I didn't have no intervals. I plan it out in Training Peaks, but you got to keep the first 3 or 4 days open-ended. And that's when the athlete, you need to like either ask yourself if you're self-coaching or report back. I rode today, but I didn't feel great. And then it's like, I need more recovery. And so a lot of times when you're developing the training plan post an event like the Oat Route or a Gila or a Cascade or just any ginormous event, you don't start training when the training plan says go. You start training again when your body says, okay, we're back.
Yeah.
But you got to ease back into it with some recovery rides, good nutrition, got to catch back up on your sleep, and really just time and patience.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this at length before about just like it's a really important skill, I think, for all athletes and just humans in general in our, technology driven world to like kind of tap into your inner Jedi and like learn how to kind of listen to your body. But if, if you have a Whoop and you use it and you love it, like that's also important to look at. I'm sure the Whoop data after these, after the DK is going to be insane.
If you're in the green the day after DK.
Yeah, you did it wrong.
Yeah, I think the Whoop is wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It could be the Whoop. But like, yeah, so just look at that, check in with how you feel immediately upon waking up. It's like, are you struggling to get out of bed at your normal time? Might be a sign. So just, be able to tap into that.
Yeah. And, 2 or 3 days at least, but really the whole week afterwards, that's like your rest week, break week,
eat week.
Don't plan on doing much in terms of training week.
All right. Next question from Elliot. Just signed up for your gravel crusher training.
Awesome, Elliot.
He's been sweet spotting for the last 2 months and he gets along simulation rides, but he's not looking to win the race. And he just wants to like do better than the years past. And he is wondering he's wondering about improving the endurance through, should he just be doing more 3x20 sweet spot and adding minutes to that? And he's just looking to finish in 6 hours. Okay.
Well, first of all, Elliot, thanks for being on our gravel, our crusher plan. It's a great race. So it looks like you've done it before. As you remember, it's very difficult. The simulation rides, you got to do those on your Saturdays just to survive that beast of a race.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do your advanced aerobic endurance intervals during the week when you're working, presumably. But the best training for the crusher is, doing those simulation rides. So just because you don't want to win, but you still want to go faster, that's going to be challenging. And so FTFP, but know that the reason why you're doing that is those simulation rides. The crusher is all about your diesel power for 6 hours. And to train that, you just got to go out and do that in those simulation rides. So, if you don't think that doing 3x20 sweet spot for 2 hours is a better approach, it's not. There's no substitute for the long ride.
Right.
And you just got to get there and do that. There's some magic that happens physiologically at hour 4, 5, and 6, and you got to train that and prepare for that in training. And so do your intervals midweek, do your gravel simulation rides long on the weekend per the plan.
Yeah. And I'd say, like, maybe this is wrong and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would also say if you want a little extra credit in those long simulation rides, try and find a climb near the end of that ride to ride hard up, because I mean, that's what the crusher is like. So just even from just like a sensation perspective, to see how it feels to be riding hard up a hard climb when it's really hot at the end of 5 or 6 hours, and like
that's not necessarily extra credit. I would call that specificity.
Yeah.
And I think we ask you to do that in the training plan.
I remember that from last year.
Yeah. And I think Elliot, I remember your order coming in, and I know that you're from Utah, and I know you guys got those climbs. So yeah, go do 2 1-hour climbs, and make sure that last one is towards the end of your long ride, and then you're already tired coming into it.
Yeah.
And that's it doesn't get any better than that.
No. All right, from Dan, just finished Sweet Spot 3, getting ready to start the road racing intervals plan. Should I insert a week off in between the 2 plans, and how long should I schedule between the end of the road race interval plan and my A race?
Right on, Dan. So we're big fans of periodization, rest weeks, and I think that's where your question is coming from. So 3 weeks on, 1 week off regularly, just repeat pattern after pattern. If you're putting 2 plans together like that, you'll want to edit in those rest weeks. So a lot of our 6-week plans are just 6 weeks of just really good training. They're making the assumption you had a rest week at the beginning and then towards the end. But if you're putting those 2 plans together, edit in the rest weeks, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. If that doesn't quite work with your schedule, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, that's a thing. You can do 15 days on, 3 or 4 days off in terms of like a rest block. So just make sure you're taking regular regeneration blocks. And the second part of your question, how long should I schedule between the end of a road race interval plan and my A race? And so if you truly want to try to apply an overload and then plan in like a 2-week taper, for example, and try to peak for that A race because it's an A race, that would be like a custom modification. It's part of like our coaching subscription. But what you'd want to do is then just plan out your taper. And so taper is different than a rest week. Most tapers are 7 to 21 days in the literature. A good middle of the road for like a master's athlete is like 2 weeks. Just begin that on the Monday, 2 weeks prior to the race. You just design that in. A taper is kind of like 2 rest weeks, but you do want to maintain the frequency of the training, overall reduction in training volume, but maintain the intensity, if not increase it. And so I usually have athletes take 2 days off to start a taper, but Wednesday is still an interval day. And then the weekend, a good rule of thumb, if you did like 12 hours in your overload week, do 6 hours in the first week of the taper, but still keep up your intervals and the frequency, but just reduce your overall training volume. I think we did a whole podcast on peaking.
Yeah, sure we did. All right, moving on. From Humunuku.
His name is John Living Good. Hi, John.
Does he live in Hawaii?
John, I don't know where your username comes from, but I wouldn't even know it if you didn't say hi in Asheville a couple weeks ago. So I just happened to put that together.
That's awesome. All right. Love the gravel plans. Totally give me power. Problem is he's really bad at fast starts up 5 to 10 minute climbs, which often causes me to lose contact with the front group, a lot of which he picks off on later climbs. That was probably me on that first day. Where should I add in some high intensity start training to the gravel plan? Sort of something like maybe substituting the Tuesday workouts with something similar to the mountain bike start workouts.
Yeah. So gravel training tends to turn racers into diesels, because you do so much tempo and sweet spot work. You got to be able to go fast for 5 hours. And what John's talked about in the Haute Route, we did this 20-minute segment right off the bat, and that's just raw super threshold power, just full gas. And so the one thing you want to make sure you're doing is probably some threshold workouts, like 3x10, full gas as hard as you can go, like 5 to 10 minutes off. And then the other thing that's going to help your high-end super threshold power is VO2 max intervals. So 3 minuters, 4 minuters, 5 minuters. And so the days to add those in are we podcasted a few weeks ago about a fatigue dependent training plan. The hardest workout of the week or the block it follows the rest day. So if you're resting Monday, your VO2s, your thresholds should go in on Tuesday, and that can go over top of whatever that your gravel plan had. Our gravel in-season plan may be a way to go because it does include some intervals like that, and it's more balanced if you've done your first big event of the year. But yeah, it's interesting. Gravel, you don't really go full gas at any one point because it's really how fast you can get from point A to point B. So it's truly the tortoise versus the hare. But the oat route with the time segments, the format is a little bit different. Therefore, the training is a little bit different. And you really need to work on that high-end power that comes from VO2 max and threshold work.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess something like the Crusher is also a little bit different because those climbs, I guess it is a kind of it's a shorter gravel race, so it is more mimicking of a road race in that there are attacks and there are like groups that form and stuff, whereas something like a DK is more like slowing down the least,
Yeah, literally the athlete slows down the least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's no VO2s in dirty cans of training.
No. All right. From Jake, asks, he is starting an ATP for the 2020 season. Haven't purchased the intervals for crits yet, but I do have a 32-week strength and sweet spot plan, which ends with a 541 TSS week. I'm not sure what the interval for crits plan starts at, so curious if I should add a week in the ATP between the two plans or just expect to jump in straight away.
Good question. I don't think you'll know the answer yet. You want to listen to your body and see what's going on once you get there, or at least not worry about that right now because you got over 32 weeks to go. That could be something you could answer 2 or 3 weeks prior to when you're considering that rest week. This is also a perfect example of what we provide in our coaching subscription, where you ask that question. We'll go into your training peaks, take a look, see what's going on, and then be able to advise you on taking that rest week or not, and then actually, make that revision for you in your training peaks and your training calendar.
Cool. All right. Final question, just a reminder for those of you watching live on YouTube, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat so we can answer them live on the show, because we're up to our last question from the forum submitted questions. This one's from Kayleen. She is a pro XC mountain biker since 2015. Her goal is to fight for a top 5 spot in the U.S. women's field. And for some reason, she's always lacking somewhere if she's improving somewhere else. So basically, she either has great endurance with a great, FTP, or her high end, like max power is terrible, or vice versa. She gets the high end up, but her endurance is bad. And she's a perfectionist. All of the rides, always get done. She knows she has the potential to get there, but she just can't seem to put it all together. Does this sound normal? Yes. Welcome to the athletic life.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a pretty common feedback from a lot of endurance athletes is that the race, cross country mountain bike or road or cyclocross or any of that, training is always a balance between the high end and base. And so much of training is what you do and when, and the timing of it all and how it fits together in relation to the timing of your event. And so, a lot of what I suspect has happened is you've done a really good base in the winter and you had a really good FTP, but you didn't have any high end. Yeah. And then you started doing high end, but because you have to reduce your training volume to do high end, then you ran out of base, and then now you got high end and no base. And so really this is just what we do in our mountain bike in-season plan, where it's balanced between one day you may do some high-end intervals in a fatigue-dependent manner design, and then the next day you may do like some sweet spot like endurance work. So it's the best of both worlds. You're doing the two simultaneously, but that's what can help you now. But when you're backing up and trying to peak for like an A race, for example, you're going to do a big base in the winter. You're going to implement our switching from base to race. We podcasted about that, and then begin a a high intensity interval training block. And then you're going to kind of put it all together in like this final race prep where you're doing both. And you're perfectly normal. I mean, that's a constant struggle. And this also probably goes to massaging your form and where do you race best? What are your strengths? Are you naturally a good endurance athlete, but maybe not have so much anaerobic power? Or have you always been good anaerobically and just, one of your weaknesses is your endurance? And everyone's different, but those are the things you want to kind of figure out. And when you put it all together, that's when you're going to hit your peak form.
What do you think about maybe trying to do some more B and C races closer to the A race to kind of sharpen the sword a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because again, like there's really no, substitute in terms of like the intensity and just the like realism of actual racing to prepare for another race. I mean, I always found that for myself when I was road racing, it's like I would do a lot of local crits. I would do some, lower tier stage races to kind of prepare for the bigger ones, just to get that, even mentally, just that high end, because it's like you have that stimulus and that motivation to go hard, which can be sometimes difficult for people to achieve in just training.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Racing is the best form of training in many cases, especially in mountain biking. You just can't go out in training and do an hour and a half full gas. And so you can use a B or C event as the training in preparation. And that's what our mountain biking season plan takes into account. It has you doing training races on the weekend, and then you gear that towards your A race. But yeah, there's short track races on like midweek Wednesdays. Those are great. Just with the Winter Park Series here in Colorado, it happens every other weekend starting in June through August. That's a great training race series, and people will use that like for just that reason, maybe to peak for one of their other bigger races or just train for it. And yeah, mountain biking is interesting in that you can go out and try to ride for 90 minutes full gas, but generally the trail conditions or other users, you just can't really open it up, nor would you be motivated to do that. The things I did to myself during mountain bike racing, I could never replicate in training.
Yeah, exactly.
You just got a number on your back, and that's the training with a number on your back.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, that is all we have for you from the forum questions. If you have any questions or watching from YouTube, like I said, feel free to drop them in. But thank you for everyone that submitted questions from the forum.
Yeah, and if you did submit a question, we will put this podcast up in the forum for you all to get your answer, and you'll get it in an audio format, not in a forum format. But yeah, this is kind of the Hail Mary time if you want to get your last question in. And we'll be back in 4 weeks with this Q&A format. So if you're listening now and you didn't get your question in, we go to our forum under the podcast section. You can go ahead and just submit your question. You can submit that tonight. We'll hold on to it, and then we'll do our best to answer it when we do our Q&A podcast again in 4 weeks.
Yeah. And then stay tuned, of course, for next week on the podcast, and subscribe, tell your friends, and best of luck to everyone racing this weekend and in training. I'm going to maybe try and ride this afternoon
it's so beautiful out.
So
yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. I'm jealous. I have to work, and then I have to take my daughter to swim practice.
Maybe get a little swim in there.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be awesome? Sometimes I'm jealous of the swimmers. Well, anyway, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you for Jackson for being here. And we will talk to you again next week.
All right. Adios.
Thanks, everybody.